Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome to this demonstrating implementation excellence stream here at the SNOMED CT Expo 2023. My name is Susie Roy. I'm the Customer Relations Manager for the Americas, Collaboration Specialist, and Research Engagement Lead at SNOMED International. And today I'll be moderating this session, and we welcome everyone who's both online and in the room. Those online, please make sure to put your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be answering all the questions at the end of today's presentation. Those in the room, please make sure to go up to the microphone in the center of the room when it's time for questions, and use the microphone so that those online can hear the questions as well. So I'd like to please introduce Dr. Robert Hausam from Hausam Consulting, who'll be presenting further experience with incorporating the SNOMED CT IPS terminology, the sub-ontology, in the FHIR IPS specification. Rob?
Very good job getting through that long title, Susie. It's great to be here with all of you and be able to talk with you about the IPS and about our work to incorporate the SNOMED IPS terminology into our specifications. I do have a lot of slides. I'll try to go through a lot of them fairly quickly. Hopefully I'll be able to see them in this little screen down here. But I'm gonna, Beatrice, it's great to follow Beatrice's talk actually. It gives a wonderful real world example of the kind of things that we're all about and trying to do in IPS generally, and about what we're trying to support in this work that I'm gonna be talking about for the IPS terminology. So it's excellent to see what's happening with it in Brazil. And there'll be a few other little touch points that we'll hit as we go through here, I think. But I want to start, Beatrice said that we all know what the IPS is. I hope that's true. I don't know if it is, but anyway, I'm going to give a little bit of background information on it and as we go forward. So the IPS is basically, it's a health record extract. It's a snapshot, in time of a subject of care's health information. It's designed, it's designed to be international for global applications, just like we were, and hopefully many countries will be able to adopt it, and we'll be able to carry our data using that cross borders, which may be international borders. Like if I do take Beatrice up on her invitation to come to Brazil, and hopefully I won't step in one of those little whatever it was, but but hopefully I will have an opportunity to do that someday, and I'd like to be able to take my IPS with me when I do. But it's also can be used across any kind of borders or boundaries. We don't think of it as being only limited to international travel or anything like that. It could be even a border across the street from one health system to the other in your own town, potentially again at any level. But it's the scope of IPS is, at least the kind of the prototype use case, is the unscheduled cross-border care. But some of the other slides will show this too. But we all intended to be, have as broad a use as possible, and to also be a baseline that can be used in other ways. And again, Beatrice gave an example of kind of focusing on immunizations, and I'll touch on that here a little bit too. So you've seen this slide before on her presentation. This is basically the content sections of IPS, and so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but we have some basic kind of header information. If you're familiar with something like the CDA document standard, there's the notion of the header, and this is similar kind of information. Then we have some, the clinical sections. We have required sections, which are medications, allergies, and problems. If you want to have an IPS document, you need to say something about those at least. And we have other recommended and optional sections you see there. But so say a little bit about, more about the makeup of IPS. It's, when we talk about IPS, generally we're talking about the document. It's a document that's composed of reusable profiles, for the various clinical domains that you just saw. And they're also listed down here, and some of these nice diagrams. But you also see up there the, sort of the individual pieces, and I think the next slide will demonstrate that a little bit more. So the IPS data model looks at the IPS as a document, but there's also the notion of the library with the individual pieces, that the profiles that can be used and reused in various ways. And so If your country has a need to focus on immunizations, like we just heard, then that's certainly a legitimate thing to do. If you want it to be an IPS, official, compliant, valid IPS document, then you will need to have some statements about medications, allergies, and clinical problems. But that can be as simple as saying, I don't have any information on that. And that's still a valid thing to do if that's truly the case. And EHRs, we expect to be a window into be able to look at this through the various user interface strategies that will probably are still to be deployed, and developed and deployed. So a couple more slides to talk a little bit about our project. You heard a little bit about our cross-SDO effort, and I wasn't really going to say a lot about that, but I guess it was going to come up here on this slide. Yeah, it'd have to, wouldn't it? Pretty much. So we are definitely a cross-SDO initiative, and this nice diagram kind of illustrates some of what that's like. Maybe you can look at it later and look at all the different pieces, but they're all relevant to the things that come together to put this all together. And over on the left side, the primary organizations that are involved. ISO, which the 27269 is the data set standard, and SEN inspired that, and we got HL7 and IHE, and then of course SNOMED International all involved. And this diagram of the IPS landscape goes into more detail about that. And again, I won't focus on a lot of that, but I will point out, the SNOMED CT IPS free set is here, and that's also now encompasses the main part of this talk is about the IPS terminology, which is the kind of expansion of that into a full SNOMED sub-ontology. But that's used, kind of under the direction of the ISO standard and with the HL7 implementation guides for both CDA and for FHIR. The work here today is the focus on FHIR, and that's what we've been mostly working on in the last number of years, but we do have both guides, and we certainly have IHE profiles, which cover both CDA and FHIR as well, to help provide additional level of detail for implementations of IPS and all that. So, and if you want more information on all this, I want to point you here to the IPS website, where we really gathered a lot of information, and the URL's up there, and it's kind of a wealth of a one-stop place to find a lot of things about IPS, including if you want to take some of these images and use in your own presentation slides, and some of those are there. And we got other presentations and other material describing what the IPS is and how it's used and all of that. So talk about getting into more of the terminology considerations at this point. And so we have some characteristics that we think are desirable for terminology in IPS. One is it needs to be available. It needs to be, that's kind of obvious, but it's available means potentially, that it's available without being too cumbersome to obtain it. And that is one of the issues that we still have to wrestle with a bit about licensing terms and things like that. But it also needs to be suitable, fit for purpose. Ideally, it certainly should be acceptable for use globally, because we're talking about a global, international standard. Ideally, it should be developed with that intent, and also includes significant participation around the globe, in its development, maintenance, and quality assurance. And the key principle kind of, is, let's see, and I got to remember how to back up here. That button. So the key principle was making the IPS value sets available for global use at no cost for implementation of the IPS. And that's where the licensing comes into play. So that gets us, to SNOMED CT. And I guess I'll pause here just a bit. If I am talking too rapidly, you can tell me to slow down a little bit, and I don't mind questions if you have some burning ones at this point. But why would we use SNOMED in IPS? I mean, it's probably maybe fairly obvious to this audience, I would imagine. But SNOMED CT is, I'll say it anyway, and I think most people, certainly in this room, would state that it's considered to be the premier global clinical terminology. It's an obvious choice for us to use for multiple sections, and profiles in our implementation guide. It's got the broadest clinical domain coverage. It's got it, of course, our community that's behind its development and implementation and use, and seems pretty much an ideal choice really for our clinical, coding in IPS. But there are some limitations which are, again, that available for global use at no cost. That's a bit tricky. We're certainly not there yet anyway, but we're moving in that direction. And that's a lot of what the IPS terminology is about. So this just talks about, the licensing model. I won't go into more detail about that, but this is a bit of a barrier we're still, working on. So we're looking for, solution to allow broader use of SNOMED in IPS. And so that's where we get into the SNOMED CT free sets, the GPS, which is the global patient set, and the IPS rep set and terminology that we talked about. Again, there's a little more detail here. I won't go into all of that, but originally, SNOMED offered the IPS free set as, for use in HL7 standards, and that became part of the GPS, and then now has, moved on to the full, IPS terminology. So I'll move on to that. And so that's, the IPS terminology is an evolution of the free set, provides advanced terminology features. Mainly it adds the hierarchy, to support, relationships for the concepts that are included. And so you can do, we can do reasoning across that, and we can, write, definitions of value sets based on the hierarchy for that subset of concepts. It's a pretty great idea, really. And it's perfect for, like we heard about from Beatrice with Brazil. Brazil's currently at this point not a member country, but they can certainly they have full use and access to the IPS terminology and can use advanced tools to work with that subset, and that subset should grow over time, and then and they may become members again, but we don't know when that'll happen. And there's a lot of other countries in that same situation. So initial release of the IPS terminology was last year, November 30th, 2022, and it's to be released yearly, so a new release will be coming out soon. All right, so now we'll take this on to the implementation guide in FHIR from HL7 and talk a little bit about our progress and some of the possibilities and a few of the pitfalls that kind of run into. And a lot of this work is really rather recent, like including in the last few days, earlier this week. And I was trying to figure out how to present all of it, and a lot of it's going to be screenshots, but we'll see how that works. But so a little bit about the current state. We've got the current release 1.1 of the IPS FHIR implementation guide. It's got multiple value sets. It's got 30, if I counted correctly, 30 value sets, which are, we call in HL7, we call them value sets, and SNOMED, they're basically very similar to ref sets, sets of codes basically that define based on SNOMED CT. And some of these are defined in order to be expanded. And again, I don't know if everyone's, most of you probably familiar with that, what that means, but basically taking a definition of a value set and applying it to the terminology and finding out what's the actual list of concepts that, that I'm going to actually use from this value set. Because it might change over time as we get new SNOMED releases and all that. That's we're going to get. And so at this point in time, I want to know what's there, and so I'll expand the value set to find that out. And so we have some of these that are intended to be based on the full SNOMED International Edition release, and others that are to be based on the IPS terminology. And anyway, it's not easy for IPS implementers to kind of figure this out and navigate that. So I think we want to try to simplify it a bit, and so that's just part of what I'll be talking about. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this well. I hope you can see it better than I can, but this is an example of FHIR value set definition based on the full release, and I've highlighted the bits here, which basically have the SNOMED URI for the SNOMED version string, which basically includes, it basically says we're using this particular module ID, and so that's identifying the international edition of SNOMED, and that's been kind of peppered throughout the various parts of the value set definition. These include statements that are in there, and so that's the one flavor of it. And then we have the other flavor based on the free set, where we did it a little bit differently, and we still include the international release, but we also scope it by the IPS ref set, which this module idea that'll show up again here in a bit. But it's a bit of a it's two different ways of doing it, and this is using ECL, and it requires a server that can deal with that, and that's one of the issues that we have. But so that's what's there right now, but the key goal would be to, as I stated, if you were here in my presentation last year, that we wanted to provide a single SNOMED CT-based value set definition, so we could use it across whatever set of SNOMED you have access to, whether that's the international edition or the IPS terminology, or maybe your own national edition if you're in US or Canada or Australia or any other member you have your own edition. You should be able to use, hopefully you have one value set definition that works for all of these. So basically, the first thing I had to do to kind of try some of this out was to update the definitions, and this is not in the published stuff yet. It's really local for me right now, but this basically the idea is to achieve that goal. We're going to remove those version statements, and so you see that there, and we'll do the same thing here and remove also that qualifier for the ref set from the definitions and make them generic, I guess you might say. But so kind of did that work first, and then the next couple of slides I think are going to talk about some of the issues I ran into in trying to actually do this. The first was getting the terminology loaded onto the servers I wanted to use, and right now I've picked on two, mainly the FHIR build server that was put together, originally written by Graham Grieve and for the FHIR build ecosystem. It's used for the FHIR specification itself and the FHIR IGs, including IPS. And so it's tx.phir.org is the server name. And then we also Onto server, which probably everybody here has heard a lot about. And so those are the two. There's other servers out there. I mean, Snowstorm, there's a number of others. I didn't really try this on any of those yet, but anyway, it was originally not possible to even get this content onto the server like tx.phir.org because of some of the ways the module dependency was done initially, but then that was updated in the official release, and that part worked. But then I ran into some missing concepts. In the concepts file, there were 14 concepts that had shown up in the reference sets in one or more places, but weren't in the concepts file, and that basically broke the loading routine for tx.phir.org. But 5 minutes. Okay. All right. So I have to go pretty fast here, but anyway, I would say we were able to hack that basically and put those concepts in and get that loaded, and Onto server had a little bit easier time getting it loaded, so we were able to do that. So you might have to look at the rest of these. I'll just kind of quickly touch on what the other difficulties were, but there were some bugs we found and fixed, again, in the last few days even, with, Onto server didn't support some things yet. We're trying to get Onto server up so it can fully handle the FHIR build, but it's still a work in progress. And so it's not Onto server's fault, it's just part of the evolution. So multiple module IDs is another issue that, there's actually two different ones. There's the one for the summary ref set, and then also a different one for the IPS terminology. And the two servers are actually using the two different ones right now. So, I just had a question there. Do we really need two separate ones? Andrew might have an opinion on that, but we'll talk about that right now. The URI syntax is another thing. There's for sub-ontologies, we're supposed to, it's a different, sub instead of SCT, but the servers right now don't recognize that. We kind of, I guess, glossed over that, and we're still using SCT in the ones we have right now. So we'll have to see about that. But results, finally get to that. Maybe I'll have enough time to go through them. So basically did some value set expansions on, picked a particular one value set, the descendants of device. So our medical devices IPS value set. And you either did the compose with the FHIR descendant of, or the SNOMED ECL constraints. And it's got multiple versions that were used, international edition, and also Australian, and also the IPS terminology, and then the 2 different servers. So again, I really don't know how this shows up basically, and I can't really read it, but basically, so there's 8 slides here, and I'll go through them really quickly, but basically this one's done on the tx.fhir.org server with the full international edition and using the FHIR filters, and it's able to give an expansion, and it says what version it's using, which is one of the latest international editions, and so that works okay. We switch to the ECL filter. tx.fhir.org doesn't know what to do with that, so it can't handle that yet. It's not intended to. It hasn't been supported, so that's an issue if we try to leverage ECL too much. If we switch to the IPS terminology, then tx.fhir.org is again able to do that. And you see a much smaller number of concepts. I think it was like 189. I can't read it from here, but anyway, it's the same definition, but you get the appropriate set of codes that you can use in your own place, and that's what we're shooting for. That was our goal. If we do ECL again, we don't get anything. Now, if I switch to onto server, again, I get a good, with the international edition, I get an expansion using the FHIR filter. But onto server, if I don't tell it otherwise, it picks the Australian edition, which is probably what they would want. So that's a good thing. We don't lock it in this way since we've kind of opened that up. And let's see, with ECL, onto server does know how to handle ECL, so that works quite well. It gives the same set of concepts, and that's good. But then if I move on to trying the IPS terminology with the FHIR filter, even though I was able to load it onto server, it doesn't work in the publishing, because there's a glitch with an undocumented parameter in the interaction between onto server and the FHIR IG publisher that I guess Graham Grieve and Michael did as of yesterday, and that's going to get fixed. But right now, onto server can't do these the IPS terminology expansions. Although if I send a query to it directly, it handles it just fine. And the last of these slides is on the ECL, same thing. It's not able to handle it because of that glitch that I mentioned. So just really quickly about some conclusions and future plans. I didn't put a whole lot here, but we're making significant progress, I think. But the future plans are basically, I'm gonna propose anyway to our group that we update to remove those versions and all that, and simplify that, and get us down to one definition that we can then apply, and then we can work out the bugs, and we can tell people how to apply that in their own situation. And hopefully that material should show up in the ballot in the May HL7 ballot cycle for our 2.0 STU version. And continue to work with SNOMED International on making this all work better, all that. And that was it.
Thank you, Rob. And you were right, you were going to go right up to time. So we probably have time for one question. If anyone in the room had a question for Rob, you can go up to the microphone. I'll check the online. Otherwise, if not, we're pretty much at way. So thank you everyone for joining us for this presentation, the demonstration.